And then sort of moving towards that despair side of the mental health continuum, I think the biggest barrier is fear, right? Fear of getting it wrong, fear of saying the wrong thing, fear of crossing professional boundaries. People who had sort of built their identity around having an eating disorder or some other form of addiction. A healing community is one that just constantly nudges you further and further towards that delight side of life. And I don't mean that in like surface level ways, right? It's not about your level in the organization or getting the next promotion or getting a pay raise, but it's the delight in terms of your heart and your soul, and like true well-being.
Hello and welcome to Hello Moxie. I am joined today by the lovely Carylynn Larson. Carylynn and I met in Heroic Public Speaking grad that we did last year, and we're also in their public speaking masterclass now. And we are mutually connected through my dear executive coach who introduced us. And who knew that we would be in the same class at grad? It's been such a cool journey. So Carylynn, welcome to the show.
I'm good. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah. So I would love for you to tell our listeners a little bit about you and what's lighting you up right now.
Ooh, what's lighting me up? All right, a little bit about me. As Nicole said, my name is Carylynn Larson. I live in Arlington, Virginia, just down the road from Nicole. I am, professionally speaking, a psychologist, an executive coach who is really also passionate about mental health, and that'll come up some as we talk today. And really excited to be launching my own keynote on mental health at work and how to break through the fear and stigma that surrounds it.
It's such an important topic. I can't wait for your talk to come out into the world. I've heard it so many times and it's amazing. So very, very cool.
Yeah,
so let's kick it off. So I would love to know, so who is a woman in history, Carylynn, that's just has inspired you in your life? Who, or is it multiple people?
Yeah. So to me, to be inspired means to be moved. So when I hear that question, I had to step back and think, who has really moved me? And at first, when you told me about this amazing podcast and asked if I'd be on it, I really racked my brain for some famous historical figure that had moved me in some way. And I was coming up empty. And then, it hit me like a load of bricks that it is a group of people. It's not just one person. And it specifically is a group of women that I was with when I was in this month-long residential treatment program for an eating disorder that I was struggling with.
That's incredible. So tell me about these women.
Yeah, so we were all there to break free from eating disorders of different varieties. And, while that could be an incredibly depressing and, triggering environment, this group of women was just amazing, something I never expected. I expected great therapy and great treatment, but I didn't necessarily expect to be so impacted by the community of people there. They were full of grace and full of love. They were so welcoming. They helped me settle in and feel at home, right? Which is a challenge in itself when you're 2,000 miles from home and, on pins and needles about this leap of faith that you just took. And then as soon as I was sort of settled in, they started to challenge me. They reminded me that none of us were there to stay stuck. They called me out on excuses I would make and things that I would say that just really weren't fair or true. And they did all of that with love, right? Their intent wasn't to hurt me. Their intent was to help me stop hurting myself. And that just was incredible. It had such a profound impact on my life.
That's so beautiful that they invited grace, but also I love that you said that they challenged you and they were in the treatment with you, right? They were going through treatment together with you. So they were going through the exact same, well, similar, not exactly the same.
Yeah, exactly. Right. Wow. So often we look at our support system, we look to people who look like they have it all together, right? Everything's going well for them. But this was a scenario in which the people who had the most powerful influence on me were also hurting, right? Like they were also in a really like dark and difficult place. And honestly, I think part of their vulnerability was what moved me so much, what inspired me so
Mm.
much.
It probably, I imagine, encouraged you to feel much more vulnerable, but also like the solidarity. I'm sure that that brought you, like, tell me more about that solidarity. How did that help you kind of like, because you had been struggling with your eating disorder for a while before you went to the treatment facility, correct? So,
Absolutely.
what
Yeah.
was it specifically about this group and that solidarity that you feel like really allowed you to break through this time?
Yeah, solidarity is it's a great word. It's an interesting word there, because I think sometimes we think of like solidarity as we've got it all figured out. We're like
Mm.
solid, but in this case, the solidarity was like a shared commitment to like breaking free of what we were struggling with, and and I can't say that. Well, no, I did show up with that in mind, but I had been part of so many other support groups for like 6 years that were not really focused on that, actually, right? They were much more focused on just getting by almost, right? Like
Interesting.
people who had sort of built their identity around having an eating disorder or some other form of addiction, and who were showing up for support groups for solidarity around being sick instead of solidarity
Mm.
around being well. And like it was a completely different belief system that was baked in to this community. And clearly, what I could tell is that, you know, that it was a culture that was self-sustaining because people would leave and then people like me would come in, right? And people would stay. It was a 1 month minimum stay. Most of the people there were had been there for months and months, right? If not like 9 months, a year. And so as people come in to this little community, they were really transitioning people like me into that belief system. Like, this is what we
Mm.
believe here, right? And that was so incredibly helpful.
What was it about what the belief system was through this program that you had with these amazing women versus the belief system? Like, what were some of the beliefs specifically that differed from the other recovery programs that you had been part of?
I think the biggest one was that you could break free
Mm.
an eating disorder, or really from addiction or from mental health struggles, that you didn't have to be defined by it. That was the biggest belief system. And
Mhm.
then building off that, the belief system that that's what we were there to do,
Mm.
which makes a big difference. We weren't there to be sick. We were there to break free and be well.
And what did being well look like there? Like, what actions were you doing that was different?
Ooh, so many things. And this was an eating disorder specific residential treatment program. And so a lot of it was things like paying attention to hunger and fullness cues instead of, right,
Mm. Mhm.
instead of letting our fears and our internal dialogue impact what we were eating. A lot of it was being intentional about being self-reflective and having the discipline to write out things that we were thinking and feeling, and
Mhm.
grounding them, trying to look at to what extent that was true, right? Just because you have a thought or have a feeling doesn't mean that it's true, or that it's feelings are what they are, but it doesn't mean that we have to be stuck in them,
Yeah.
or defined by them.
I mean, I think that could apply in so many different ways or aspects, right? Like paying attention to your hunger cues is really just an invitation to listen to your body more, right? Like really paying attention to your body. And the self-reflection part is really like key to anything we're trying to, is really taking the time to pay attention and write down. What do you think that act of self-reflection did for you?
did so much. I mean, there's so many things in the world right now that just distract us from being
Mhm.
reflective, from being true and honest with ourselves. And so I can't say that I had done a lot of deep self reflection.
Mhm.
I had great conversations with friends and therapists. But the trouble with that is, and it's not a trouble necessarily, the limitation, I'll say, of that is that, maybe you have an hour, maybe you have a conversation with a friend and it's 30 minutes, 15 minutes. Like there's only so deep you can go in 15 or 30 minutes. But when you're in residential treatment for a month,
Yeah.
you just go deeper and deeper into your own psyche.
Yeah, you're not kidding about that. You mentioned that the women, these women in the group with you, they really challenged you. What like you have to be in a really safe place to feel comfortable being challenged by people that are strangers, you know? So that's intriguing to me. Like these women are all strangers coming from all across the country. You're already in a very vulnerable position. You're coming there to recover from something that probably feels deeply shameful. And now these women are showing up and they're challenging me. Like, did you ever have moments where you were just like really angry and you just were like, what? What are they, you know? Or was
Oh,
it always just, were you always just welcoming that challenge?
I would love to say that I was always welcoming that challenge, but that would not be true. And
Mm,
and it, you know, we can all relate to that.
yeah.
You appreciate it in hindsight more than you appreciate it in the moment.
Mhm.
Of course, right? In the moment, it being challenged can feel like a threat, and being challenged can feel, yeah, like difficult to take. But even, and when I say hindsight, I mean usually it would only take 30 minutes, an hour, for not just myself but anyone in the group to kind of circle back and say, hey, I'm sorry for how I reacted when you said that. Right,
Mm.
you were right, and I'm glad you said something because it helped me stop and think about really where I was coming from, or what I was really doing and why I was doing it. So no, I don't think all of us, any of us, always reacted well in the moment, but certainly it doesn't take all that long to recognize that that type of challenge that comes from a place of love is a gift, and to be really grateful for that gift.
How do you know the difference of being challenged from coming from a place of love versus not? What do you notice to be the difference there?
That's such a great question. I think a lot of it is agenda, right?
Mm.
Just what is the person's agenda? And I think we can all think of times when someone has challenged us on something, and whether it was fair or not, our assumption or our belief was that they were doing that because it served them in some way to challenge
Mm.
us. And so being challenged when the agenda is just to help, like they have no personal agenda. Their agenda is to help us get better, which is why we say we're there,
Mhm.
right? That's what stands out.
That's so amazing. So what is your relationship like? How have you kept in touch with these amazing women over time? Like how is your how have your relationships evolved? I know since you I mean, I know about your own journey afterwards, which is remarkable. I'd love for you to tell the listeners about that. But like, what has your journey been like since then? I'm asking you like 10 questions at the same time because
I can
so let
handle
me
it,
back
Nicole.
up,
Bring it
stop, because I
on.
don't want to overwhelm you with all these questions. So first question is, how has your relationship with these lovely women evolved?
It's a great question. Many of us kept in touch for a time. I wouldn't say that I talk to them anymore, but I think of them all the time.
Oh.
Yeah, it's really interesting. Facebook existed back then. And so
Mhm.
I connected with many of them there, and I'll still see updates and things that these women are doing, and seeing them, continue to live full lives and thrive has been really amazing.
You know what's really interesting about that? So I actually started this podcast because I was inspired by a project that I did when I was in sixth grade with my sixth grade teacher. He was an exceptional teacher. He really cared about his students, and I felt that from him. And I remember he had me and a couple other students be in this skunk group. He called us this, we were the skunk group. And I, at the time, I don't know, I figured out since where the reference was. But um, anyway, that, I don't keep in touch with my sixth grade teacher. I may see him on Facebook here and there, but I'll never forget the impact that he had on me and how that's helped me create these other, make these other decisions in my life. And I think that that's your experience too, just highlights that, the people can come in and out of our lives and have a really tremendous, like, lifelong impact, but they don't necessarily need to be our best friends that we're talking to all the time for that to be the case. And that we can have an impact and help other people, even if it's just, coming in and out of their lives at a really pivotal time when they're needed.
Absolutely. And in the process of really reflecting on my journey deeply and putting together this keynote, one of the things that I realized was that actually it's often the people that we have a little distance from that are the easiest to hear out, especially on those challenges to us, right? Because when friends and family call us out on things, it feels like that much more of a threat to, like, the relationship. Or I wrote all these things in my journal at the time about how I was a terrible, awful friend. And so, it's harder to challenge people, I think, when there is a close connection. And so, if a stranger on the street walks up and challenges you, you might not even take them seriously. But those people in our lives that, again, we know that their agenda is good, that they're in it for us. We have a connection, but it's not like your best friend.
Yeah.
I have found that there is incredible power in that.
Tell me more. What have you noticed in the workplace specifically that has helped with that? Have you had experience with that?
I have had some experiences with that, but I think the majority of my insights around that actually come from, so I founded a nonprofit that helps to bridge treatment gaps for mental health as a result of my own story. And we have always taken a community-based approach. And a lot of what we do is with peer groups that are not support groups and that they're therapist-led. So there's that intentional focus on, we're here to be well, right? Like, we are here to break free, and having a therapist there to emphasize that, or at least a facilitator there to emphasize that culture really helps. But in those groups, I mean, if you look at the testimonials from our clients, they all point to the power of the community. They all point to how being in an environment with other people going through things who care deeply about them, right, was so transformational for them. And it's not that I haven't seen it at work, but honestly, I don't think most workplaces have a culture that fosters that. I think that's rare to find these days. It's rare to find a place to work where people go to say, like, this, I go to work because it's a healing community. I go to work because these people challenge me and support me and believe in me and build me up.
Yeah, that is definitely a rarity to find. What do you think needs to change?
Ooh, big question. I don't think it's just me that thinks it needs to change. I think there is a major movement around the culture of work, right? And being able to have workplaces where, I mean, we've talked for a long time about corporate culture. So that's not new. But when you look at the loneliest epidemic and the disconnect that people are finding in society, and then you think about the fact that work is where most of us spend our time, it just, if you connect those dots, right? Like, work is a place where we could be really finding that kind of healing, connected community.
Yeah. And it really ties back to your earlier point about the people that you work with. They're not as closely connected to you as your friends and your family, and you're with them all day long. So wouldn't it be so great if you could go to work and feel like this is a safe place where, they can heal. So
absolutely.
Healing communities, which is this is your keynote. This is exactly what you talk about, right? So tell our listeners about your amazing keynote and Tell us about your vision for what you think what people can do in the workplace to help create and cultivate these healing communities.
Yeah. So when I think about a healing community, I don't necessarily think about like doctors and nurses and therapists, right? A healing community is just one that makes you become a better, not makes you, but puts you in a context and believes that you can become a better and better version of yourself. So
Mm.
if you think of mental health as a spectrum from despair on one deep, dark side of it to delight on the other side of it, a healing community is one that just constantly nudges you further and further towards that delight side of life. And I don't mean that in like surface level ways, right? It's not about your level in the organization or getting the next promotion or getting a pay raise, but it's the delight in terms of your heart and your soul and like true well-being.
I love that. I want to feel more delight at work, don't we all?
I do. Yeah.
Yes. What are some of the like biggest barriers that you see right now that is preventing people from feeling and experiencing that?
Ooh, I think there's several, right? For one, many corporate environments are just really chaotic, fast paced, high stress.
Mhm.
Some are even competitive. And
Mhm.
it doesn't necessarily have to be bottom line, profit driven corporate America. I work with a lot of very mission driven organizations that are where still like the passion that people feel for the mission of the organization often means that they're more invested in the work than they are in one another. And that's sort of a
Ooh.
recipe for being isolated. So I think that's part of it is just how focused we are on getting things done at work. I think part of it is that even though we love the term growth mindset and we're sort of bought into that, we often sell ourselves short and we sell other people short too, right? We assume that we are who we are, or this is about as good as it gets, or, right? Like we just don't really think about the fact that things can be better. They can be better and better and better, and we can be better and better versions of ourselves. And then, sort of moving towards that despair side of the mental health continuum, I think the biggest barrier is fear, right? Like fear of getting it wrong, fear of saying the wrong thing, fear of crossing professional boundaries. We want to help, but we don't know how, and we don't want to offend someone. We don't want to get ourselves in trouble. And we don't want to do harm, of course, but most people just don't know what to do or what to say or how they would help. And so, as the people witnessing others struggling, we stay silent and they stay silent.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, you hit the nail on the head. I love what you shared about so often people care more about the work than the people. And the belief that I love this really beautiful, expansive idea that things can always be better. Like we can always be working towards making this better rather than focusing on what's wrong. And fear being the biggest barrier, I think, is huge. So, especially for people who aren't in leadership positions, right? Because there's a power dynamic there, right? Like realistically, people that are, So, what would you recommend? What's your advice for, like, let's just say I'm Sally and I'm a sole contributor to this company. And I noticed that my colleague is really, really irritable, showing up late. And when they're at work, they're not like they used to be. Something's going on.
Yeah,
What,
what would
what
I?
what would I do if I'm Sally and I notice that my colleague is definitely different and kind of checked out?
Yeah. So the first thing, like the first part of it, I think, is to choose a mindset that will serve us well. And that sounds funny, but I'm a coach, right? So I come at things through the lens of the way we see things matters, and it matters a lot, right? So if am I Sally or am I talking about Sally? I want to use the right terms here.
Sally's the one that notices that her colleague is coming in irritated and showing up late.
Okay,
Yeah.
let's call Sally's friend Beth, right?
Mhm.
So if I'm Sally
Yeah.
and I am thinking that Beth is irritable, right? She's an irritable person. She's a little short. She's a little prickly. She used to be more engaged, but now she's not. And that language, if you listen to that language, it's not a growth mindset. I'm not choosing to believe that this is a state of being, right? And so we really have to remember that other people are in a state of being, and most people are not their best. I know I'm not, right?
Such a really good distinction, Carylynn.
So if you choose to believe that people can learn and grow and change, right? If you look at Beth, if I'm Sally and I look at Beth and I say, that's not Beth at her best, right? Like that's crazy to think that that's Beth at her best. Beth at her best is amazing. Then it starts to give you all these ideas and motivation of like, I don't want to stand around and watch Beth suffer, right? That's crazy. Why would I do that? I want to be somebody that helps Beth become her best. So that's first. First and foremost is that mindset.
Mm-hmm.
And then the second thing is, okay, well, so how would you approach Beth, right? And I talk about the fact that vulnerability and listening go hand in hand, right? And to start with vulnerability. And it's not about vulnerability doesn't mean making it all about you and right, like how you're not at your best or whatever. It's just offering something that shows that you're willing to put yourself out there. And so many times it makes it safe for the other person to put themselves out there a bit.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And I wouldn't expect someone to share all of everything on their mind or whatever is going on with them, even if they have that self-awareness all at once. But consistently showing up as someone who is willing to open up is such an important part of it. And then, of course, the listening, right? Listening is so important.
Yeah. So if I'm Sally and I'm, maybe I'm struggling too, I could come to Beth and just be like, man, I had just a rough day yesterday. I had this going on, blah, blah, blah. And that might invite her to feel safe where she could open up and share. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Beautiful.
Yeah. And then I'll throw in there, I think the third part of it that is what really scares us is, the first part's a mindset and the second part is an approach. Maybe we call the third part like an intervention, right? Like at some point, I think if we care enough about people, we take a risk to say something, right? To really express our concern for them and how much we care. So this idea of candor and care. So that might sound like, hey, Beth, I've noticed that you've really been keeping to yourself more recently, right? You haven't been joining us for lunches. And right. And whatever like the concern is there, right? But you say that, and I encourage people to link that back to what that person says they want, right? So then you really have to be thoughtful about this. What does Beth say she wants, right? Beth says she wants to feel less overwhelmed, but she doesn't go to lunch, right? So to express that concern that you don't come to lunch with us anymore, and yet you say you want to be less overwhelmed. Lunch is a time to put the work aside.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So what have you noticed in workplaces that are implementing or environments that are implementing this framework? What have you seen change most of all?
Yeah. I mean, the biggest thing is that people have a place to go when they are having, like you said, like a rough day or when something goes wrong. Or, sometimes it's even something is adjusting corporately. So an acquisition, or there being reductions in force, or whatever it might be, right? Something's going on in the environment that really affects everyone. There's a natural place to go to come together to support one another. And we know this. We've known this for a long time from a social psychology lens, is that as humans, one of our biggest sources of resilience is other people, right? This idea that when we come together, that we feel stronger, we feel more hope, right? But alone, it's really hard.
That's so true. How do you think remote work, how do you think people can, so where I'm going with this is that a lot of times, like being able to know how someone, being able to pick up on, let's just say, someone's body language or behavior, if you're not physically in an office with them, maybe it might be harder to be able to know if something's going wrong with Beth. How do you recommend in that kind of environment where someone might work remotely, you can become more kind of aware and apply some of these principles?
It's a great question. And I think are some studies that show that one of the challenges of remote work is a weaker sense of community, right? A weaker sense of connection to others in the organization. I mean, I work largely remotely. So what I find from just my own work experience is that, even though if you're not in the same room with someone, if you'll take the time to have conversations that are just about connecting versus getting right into the work from the get-go, that makes such a big difference. So connection doesn't require being co-located, but it does require caring, right? It requires slowing down. It requires focusing on what really matters, right? It requires caring more about the people than their work. And so if we'll do that, I think we can do that in just about any setting. Because let's face it, there's some amazing advantages of working remote.
Yeah. I've worked remotely most of my career, the last 15 years. And I don't think I'd ever want to go back into the office. It's a luxury to have that. But I love what you shared too about just caring. It just seems like if you're leading from a place of curiosity and you're really curious about the people that you're working with, curious about, showing interest in them and wherever you're at, there's that safety that's going to come. They're going to feel safe with you because they feel that you genuinely care about them because you're asking them questions and you want to know about what's going on with them besides whether or not they finish the latest report that needs to go to the client.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. And one of the other things that I do is teach leaders to coach. And there's a great connection there because coaching is simply an approach that is deeply caring, where when you put on your coaching hat, your agenda is the other person's agenda, right? It is about what they need in that moment. It's an approach that teaches you how to be an amazing listener. And it's an approach that teaches you how to really lean into that curiosity.
We all could be a little more curious, I think.
Yeah. Yeah.
My gosh. Well, very cool. Well, this has been such a delight, Carylynn. I just adore you. I think the work that you're doing is so impactful and so important. And I'd love for you to just close out our show maybe and just share, what do you think the word Moxie means to you? And do you have a Moxie moment that you can leave our listeners with?
Oh my goodness. Yes. To me, Moxie just means having guts, right? To have guts. And so when I flash back on my life, when I think of the moment for me that took the most guts, it was, and it's still like literally makes my heart race thinking about it. Like part of me thinks like I couldn't even do that again. I'm sure I could, but right?
You could.
Oh,
you could.
Yeah. So it was this moment that I told my husband and my friends, a close group of friends that I was with at the time, that I thought I needed residential treatment, right? Like, and it was terrifying. And like, to be super clear, I have the world's most supportive husband and friends in ever. So they've always been there for me. It wasn't about being judged or being rejected. I think it was about being seen. And I think it was like this idea of admitting that I wasn't okay was, number one, admitting that I had been faking it, right? Like pretending like I was okay. And then also saying it out loud just made it real. Like it's not really real until you say it out loud. So yeah, I mean, and to me, saying it out loud was basically like saying that I literally couldn't help myself. I couldn't trust myself. And like, to admit that was it was just paralyzing. So yeah, I think that's my biggest Moxie moment ever.
Such courage, like such courage to be able to lean into that moment where truly like you were at your most vulnerable. Like I never really thought about it from that perspective. You were really admitting that you couldn't do it. You needed help. Like you couldn't do it on your own. And there's nothing more vulnerable, I think, than that acknowledgement that you need someone else's help.
Yeah. And then you look at, for example, I mean, a statistic is that only 50% of adults who need mental health care get it. I mean, I think for a lot of the other 50%, like that is the barrier. It is terrifying to actually make that call, to make that decision and reach out. And I'll also share that when I think about what made it possible for me, it was truly the fact that my best friend from high school, who had gone into treatment multiple times, she had been in and out of treatment for years, she went back again. And for her, I think that took like triple the courage, right? Because she was also in that moment admitting that like she had quote unquote failed. And trust me, I don't see that as a failure at all, but I'm sure that's how it felt for her. And so I just, when I heard her say that she was going back, I realized that if she could admit that she still needed help, that I could admit that I needed it too.
It just goes back full circle to like the leading with vulnerability, right? Like when we lead with humility and vulnerability and ask, let people around us know, like, we don't have it figured out. We need help. It's such an invitation for other people to also be vulnerable. But like that vulnerability is an invitation also to finding strength in other people around us and like that community and everything. So I just think that's such a beautiful, courageous decision. And look at what you've been able to do since that experience. It's incredible. Like you've built this amazing mental health recovery facility, Rock Recovery, that is changing lives every day. And I just think you're such a light and an example to so many women who, to show them what's possible, and men, all people. Like I love that your experience is such a wonderful, hopeful example, is that you're not a victim and that you don't have to let your past define you, and you can change and you can be free from addiction or whatever you're struggling with. I mean, you're living proof of that. So thank you.
Thank you. Yes, absolutely. Great point to land on. And I hope everybody heard that.
Yeah. So thank you so much. Thank you for being on the show. And where can our listeners find out more about you?
Great. They can find more about, I'm going to say Rock Recovery first. Rock Recovery ED stands for eating disorders. So rockrecoveryed.org if you're looking for any support with food or eating. And my speaking website is up at CarylynnkempLarson.com. So maybe we could put that in speaker notes or something.
Yeah, we definitely will. And you got to hear her speak. It's amazing. Carylynn, thank you for joining us on the show today. And until next time, say hello, Moxie. That's a wrap for today's episode of Hello Moxie. I hope you felt that unbreakable thread connecting you to the women of the past to the trailblazing pioneers of today. Their stories of audacity, resilience, and courage are a powerful reminder of what's possible for you when you choose to live with Moxie.